Welcome to our conference today, IMCIC. It's a pleasure to have all you. And today we have an exceptional speaker, Professor Grandon Gill. He's at the University of South Florida. He is the academic director and Doctorate in the Business Administration. He's the editor-in-chief of Informing Science, the editor of the Journal of IT Education, and he has several grant fundings in the NSF program related to case studies, and also has published books and is working on cybersecurity as well with case studies. So I would like to welcome Dr. Grandon Gill today.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And Najib asked me to mention, since this is the first of the plenary sessions, that for this particular conference, in order to encourage interdisciplinary communications, individuals are being strongly encouraged to write papers related to the plenary session, reflections, or papers on interdisciplinary communication. If you attended the plenary session, you will be these will go through regular peer review, but if selected for publication, there will be no charges associated with it. So that's a very nice offer, and we strongly encourage you to take advantage of that. With that, I will turn. Did I get that about right, Najib? Good. With that, I'm going to turn to my presentation, which is entitled Closing the Loop, Incorporating Student-Developed Content into the Curriculum. And this reflects activities of mine and my colleague, Matt Malarkey, who can't be here at this session because he's actually right now working in South Africa, helping them learning how to develop case studies. And what it really reflects is an approach that's spreading across our college, whereby we are having our students create materials that are then used in subsequent classes. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is, let's see here, is this the, okay, that one, hold on a second, I'll just, okay. I'm going to start just by telling you where the University of South Florida is, because it's not in South Florida. Talk a little bit about our MUMA College of Business, and then just briefly mention some programs. I will then provide some theoretical background for the presentation. It's almost impossible to get a presentation from me where I don't talk a little bit about complexity, and so I'll give you a quick idea of what I mean when I'm talking about complexity, and why this creates a very strong need to localize your curriculum. We'll then talk a little bit from a theoretical standpoint about why we think that having students develop content is a really good idea pedagogically, and also some of the challenges we face. And then I'll spend most of the presentation walking you through two different projects which are examples of how we have done that, and talk a little bit about what we see as the outcomes. So, the University of South Florida, as I mentioned, it is not in South Florida. It is about 60 miles west of here. It is a large university. We're now over 50,000 students. This year, we should be entering the preeminent category in Florida. Florida universities in the state system are graded according to 3 categories, and this year we met all the requirements for preeminence. So we're up there with the University of Florida and Florida State University. Here are some points of pride I stuck up from the website. I'm not going to read them. And the MUMA College of Business, where I am located, is the second largest college in the university, behind Arts and Sciences. We have between 6,000 and 7,000 students. About 75% of them are undergraduates, and the rest are graduates spread across multiple programs, a variety of master's programs, a face-to-face and online MBA, and the program that I teach in, and am academic director for our Doctor of Business Administration program. And we have a number of representatives from that program sitting here in the audience. So, the theory behind this. When you have problems that you're trying to solve that have a clear right answer, you can think of the process of learning for those problems as an incremental process working towards a particular peak, which is the right answer. If you had a test, for example, you want to get every question right, and the peak is when you get 100% of the questions right. In the real world, however, we very frequently encounter wicked problems which have many very plausible solutions. And the way we visualize those is as a rugged landscape where you have many local peaks. And what's significant about this is a lot of times when we are trying to help people learn, what we're really trying to do is take them from one peak that they perceive over to another peak. But by definition, anytime you move from one peak to another peak, you have to go through an intervening valley. So we view the challenge of educating our students as one that has three key components. The first is we've got to convince people to move off the peak. In this diagram, time is on the horizontal axis, and when you're sitting at a peak, basically it looks like a flat line. So the first thing you have to do is you have to convince people that you want to move to another peak. In order to do that, one of the things you need to do is you have to remove some of that cloud of uncertainty about that objective. Because remember, there are many possible solutions a student could go to, and you want them to go to a particular solution. So we have to eliminate the cloud of uncertainty that surrounds the destination. We have to convince the student that the destination is higher fitness than where they're sitting right now, and that can be very difficult. Sometimes ignorance is bliss. And we have to do whatever we can to reduce the amount of time and the depth of the trough that they're going to have to go. Because anytime you want to move to new knowledge, you're going to have to abandon some of your old knowledge. And very often the education challenge is hardest to get people to abandon their old knowledge. Once they accept the fact that they're going somewhere new, then the process can move rather quickly. So these are basically the three elements that we have to address. Each one of them represents a different source of complexity. Now, the problem we face is that incremental change, moving to a nearby peak or moving towards a local peak, tends to be pretty well mapped out. It tends to be quite attractive, and it tends to be relatively low cost. There's a very interesting article entitled "That's Interesting" that came out in about 1971, and it was written by an author named Davis. And what he argued is if you want to be successful in the social sciences, the best way to do that is to write a paper that builds on existing knowledge and takes a very small step towards adding knowledge. That is incremental transformation. If you actually want to really transform a student's knowledge, the problem is the costs of learning are very clear. How much time am I going to have to spend on learning? What is it going to do to my social life? These are all very, very clear costs. The benefits of that knowledge are often substantially weaker. And just as an interesting side note, this particular slide came from a presentation that I did jointly with a practitioner, and this was actually how he visualized the process. So that was his slide. Now, high complexity environments tend to have certain characteristics. They tend to be very, very context sensitive. Think about the ingredients in a recipe. You leave out a tiny touch of baking powder in your cake and you're building construction material. Often very, very small changes can have a very large impact. We tend to see resistance to change. And I don't think people necessarily resist change instinctively. However, when you perceive you're on a peak, it's a pretty natural reaction to resist change because you're going to have to move down before you can get to another peak. Change tends to happen very rapidly once it starts in motion. You want to spend as little time in the valley as possible. One of the things that we've noticed in the business world is things tend to stay in a quasi-equilibrium state for a long time, and then you get a sudden shock. Whether it be a giant move in the stock market or a sudden shift in strategy, typically you don't want to remain in the middle too long. Highly complex environments are nearly impossible to model accurately. Just look at the track record of economists in actually predicting what the economy is going to do, or for that matter, the track record of social scientists trying to predict anything. They recently tried to replicate, 100 classic experiments in psychology, ones that have been in the textbook for a very long time, and they couldn't even get half of them to replicate. And these are the things we'd been telling our students as fact. Highly complex environments often differ dramatically in local behaviors. Things that work really well in one environment work really badly in another. Think, again, in terms of recipes, the ingredient garlic. If you've got a recipe with lamb, it's almost impossible to put too much garlic in it. But if you move into the dessert category, the addition of garlic is not necessarily going to help you very much. So, from an educational standpoint, one of the challenges are that if everybody starts in the same place and you're trying to take everyone to the same peak, that's a pretty simple situation. It means there's one right answer, and you know what everyone's background is. Sadly, that almost never occurs. Instead, what we encounter in business education is the exact opposing quadrant. We have got a very, very diverse set of clients and multiple targets. Not everybody wants to go to the same place. That makes it very, very hard to get a class moving in the direction that you want them to go, because you don't know what direction you want to go, they want to go to, because there are so many different possible peaks. When I look at our Doctor of Business Administration program, one of the things that amazes me is we've got 90 students, and virtually every one of those students is in the program in order to achieve a different goal. And in that quadrant up there where you've got diverse clients and ambiguous targets, you really need the learners to participate actively in identifying the target and moving towards the target. So, why involve students in this process? And what I would argue is one of the most powerful ways that we have of figuring out where we want to go is looking at self-similar peers. This is some results from simulations that I did on rugged landscapes where the idea was to move to a peak. And we had a variety of different scenarios. The expert scenario used regression to try to figure out what the best peak was. But the most effective scenarios, the ones that got you to a peak fastest and had the highest cumulative fitness, were the two scenarios, the imitate scenario and the goal-driven scenario, where the principal input we used was looking at your neighbors and seeing which of your neighbors were doing better and moving towards them. But it's a very localized phenomenon. If we looked at neighbors who were 2 steps away, we did just as well as if we looked at all the neighbors within a 6-step radius. Basically, you want to look at folks who are very close to you, and I would argue this is the basis for homophily, the tendency to group together in self-similar individuals, which is a well-known phenomenon, and the advantage of homophily is essentially everyone you watch is doing an experiment. So I recently had an example of this from my own experience. We were interested in selling a condominium we had in New Hampshire and moving somewhere a little closer. But you know, in the United States, there are tens of thousands of possible vacation spots. So how did we make the decision? Well, my wife, Claire, goes out walking with the neighbors. You know, I'm like a hermit, but she's pretty social, and so many of them mentioned that they had places in the North Carolina mountains. So we thought, all right, well, we'll probably do that. One in particular who was doing something similar to what we thought, which was renting out his unit as well as using it so that we could actually afford a unit, was wildly enthusiastic about Waynesville, which was a town that we had never heard of. So what did we do? We went up, we looked at the 3 locations where people had talked about going, and we decided, yes, Waynesville was a good thing, so we put an offer on a purchase. And in fact, we'll be closing on that on April 11th, with luck. Now, we've got other neighbors who have listened to Claire, and now they're searching for homes in Waynesville. You know, basically, we've been doing their research for them. Now, if they weren't similar to us, in our neighborhood, a lot of people have a similar demographic, similar income levels, similar houses. If you took away the street signs, you'd never be able to find your house. And as a consequence, we were good models for them, just as they were good models for us. So, based on this, we figured student-level content would be highly relevant to other students, because who's more self-similar to students than other students? They would tend to create it at the appropriate level of complexity. They would be using jargon that they would understand. For example, I can't read internet instant messages from my sons because I don't know what any of the acronyms mean. They would use local examples. We're a regional university, and as a consequence, most of our employers are local. And finally, they would be building on shared experience. So from a theoretical standpoint, having students develop content seemed like a really good idea. So there were also lots of other potential learning benefits. Developing local content builds writing skills, and that is something that is absolutely critical in our students, and it's often ignored. It builds research skills, problem-solving skills. It can force them to do higher quality work if they know that the paper they're writing is actually not going to die in oblivion on some instructor's hard drive. It reduces the wasted effort associated with these papers that essentially go nowhere, and it can also enhance the resumes of the students, because now all of a sudden their content is being used, and one of the things we do is publish it. So there are also risks. First time I did an exercise that I'll talk about, it led to this case study, plagiarism and the class project. We had 7 chapters developed for a book. 5 of them were extensively plagiarized, and 1 of them clearly violated copyright rules. That took a lot of work to recover from, and the problem is this class was almost entirely based on students from India, and they have a very different notion of intellectual property than our local students. So as a consequence, it required a considerable re-education and acid indigestion on my part. So let me quickly go through some of the examples of things we've done. And the first is a debate exercise. Now, this is used in the capstone class that I taught, though I taught my last section of it last fall. But basically what we do is each semester we take 7 or 8 topics as debate topics. Students are randomly assigned to teams, so they don't know what topic they're going to be discussing and what side they will be on. They're randomly assigned to either the pro or the con side. The teams prepare presentations, and one team prepares a pro presentation, the other prepares a con presentation, and after the president, all of the students discuss it and are required to write a reflection that gets submitted. So that's the basic idea. Just to give you an idea of some of the topics, I'm not going to read all of them. Here's an example. Resolution. Within 50 years, we can expect to see information technologies capable of the same type of flexible common sense reasoning that humans alone are capable of today. You can easily argue both sides of that topic, and so their ideas, they have to prepare the debate. So, how did we develop student-generated content here? Well, about 4 years ago, this class, which was normally about 20 or 25 people, I look about a week before the class starts and I discover I've got 60 people assigned in the class. This will not work in its existing structure with 60 people because you'd need debate teams that are like 10 people each in order to do it, and that's just too much to organize. So I had to figure out, well, what can I do to keep the essence of this exercise without doing this? So what I did is I actually broke each topic up into 3 types of teams. We had a presenter team, similar to what the original exercise had been. We had author teams who were designed to write a chapter of a book on each debate topic. And then we had reviewer teams who did peer reviews of the chapters that the other students wrote. As preparation, we developed a chapter template so that we would have consistent-looking chapters. We set up a Google Docs site so that people could share their information. And videos were prepared to walk the students through each stage of the activity. I mean, this preparation took me most of the following week, but I thought it was pretty well organized, I thought. So the activity was conducted over 2 semesters. We developed 7 chapters in the first semester, and as I mentioned, we ran into a bit of a problem with plagiarism as we discussed 2/3 of the way through the semester. Once we identified this, well, ultimately, what happened is I extended the semester by 2 weeks, which I'm not sure I was legally allowed to do, but I said it was that or get flunked. And everybody had to rewrite their work. And what was interesting is once they understood that I was looking for plagiarism, they did some very good work. As I say, there was hardly enough Tums in the Tampa Bay area to keep my digestive system working. The second semester group did a final peer review of the first semester group's work. Why? Because I still was nervous about that. And then they developed 4 more chapters. So we ended up publishing this book of debates. It's the only publication of the MUMA Business Press. And we began using drafts of it in 2014. And we designed the routine activity around the book so that people could look at the book chapter first related to the debate, and then they could develop their own activities. So here's the cover of the book, which Amy Connolly was a doctoral student who helped me with the editing. And so what were the outcomes? Well, on the negative side, there was a huge initial workload associated with this. And frankly, the evaluations, particularly the instructor evaluations, particularly for the group that was caught plagiarizing, well, let's say that they did not cover me with glory. And frankly, a lot of the students resented the fact that I was making them write because I don't think they actually understood how valuable a skill writing effectively is. On the other hand, on the plus side, the quality of the debates after we made the book available, it just improved so dramatically it was almost unbelievable. It was also much easier to do the debate exercise in later offerings because they had a model to work off of. And for my doctoral student, there were career benefits because what she did is, she went to a university which actually prized that sort of publication, and so this was a very nice publication for her, and she used it in her class. Okay, the second example is a much broader example. It involves the student authoring of case studies. And basically, the focus is discussion cases. For any of you who were in my workshop yesterday or any of the many times I've given it in past conferences, a discussion case is distinguished from other types of case studies based on it frames a topic it frames a decision that needs to be made, that very bottom line. Now, the discussion cases are typically quite long, 10 to 15 pages long. They might have just text and then 5 to 20 pages of exhibits. It gives a real-world situation described in considerable detail. Here in our College of Business, since 2012, when we got our new dean, we've become very, very enthusiastic about case studies. We are using them in more and more courses. They've led to a faculty Fulbright, a couple of National Science Foundation awards. We have a number of National Science Foundation proposals related to case studies, a whole bunch of publications, and we've also launched a journal, the MBA Case Review, to publish local case studies. The courses where students develop the cases right now are a publication course in our Doctorate of Business Administration, Executive MBA capstone class, and an MBA MIS class. Basically, we prepare students by giving them a template, videos on case writing. We require them to identify a site. We have them complete page 1, which is kind of like a synopsis of the case, except it's a narrative format. And we make sure that the cases they're dealing with are appropriate and plausible. It has to be approved by the client. We then, for the MBA classes, develop the case studies in teams, the sections. We give feedback multiple times. First, the instructor gives it, then we have a peer review round, and then optionally they can submit it for publication. Basically, in 2015, we started this in the DBA program. In 2016, we introduced it in the MBA program. While I was on the Fulbright in South Africa, we had 4 undergraduates authoring case studies as a final project, and all of them have been published. We launched the MBA Case Review, our journal, then in 2017. We started reusing them in the MBA program, so now more than half of the cases we use in our MBA courses on information systems and our capstone courses are now case studies that students have authored. And in 2018, we're trying a 2-stage authoring process to make sure more of them get into publication. So I have to move very quickly here. The benefits, very high quality cases. I was actually quite astonished by them. The students are forced to interact with organizations as part of this process. It's a very good way to integrate education and practice. It forces students to pay attention to their writing. The case protagonists, the decision makers, sit in on the classes. That really, when their cases are discussed, that really has tremendous impact, and it encourages ongoing relationships between organizations and the university. Drawbacks, it requires a lot of organization, a lot of editing time from the instructor. It's hard to grade students individually when you assign it as a team. A lot of times we have trouble getting the companies to release the case afterwards, so that's one of the things we're working on. And if a student has completed the course, their incentive to do additional editing is very, very low. So what lessons can we learn? The benefits. The students are much more capable of high-quality work than I'd ever imagined. It produces benefits in subsequent classes. It fosters valuable writing skills, and it helps build relationships. The activities have to be highly structured. Don't go into this without a really good plan. You need to do peer review to make the workload manageable. You need support from your institution, and it's good to have a friendly publication outlet, one who understands where they came from. The cautions, I would say, is they're very time-consuming for the instructor, both activities. They're more likely to succeed if you build them across semesters. The value of the publications are likely to be discounted at research institutions. You know, research institutions don't tend to care about case studies. They don't tend to care about books that are designed for classroom use. which is unfortunate. And you always have to be aware of plagiarism. All right, well, that's basically all that I have got. I thank you very much for your attention, and we can questions will be at the end of the session.